Hi, and welcome to Home Based Business Review. Today, I have a special announcement. A lot of you have been asking for this, and we're there now. Okay. We have a special guest on the line with us. His name is Dr. C. Scott. Doctor, tell me, what is your official title
Mhm.
that you hold today?
Yes, I am Dr. Scott Finney, and I am the Director of Africana Studies here at Eastern Washington University, just outside of Spokane, Washington. And I'm a senior faculty member, having begun teaching there back in 1992. Yeah,
Wow, wow.
yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah.
Well, listen, today is official announcement. You are now officially Funnels Connection
Hmm,
professional blogger on
hmm,
education.
marvelous. I appreciate
And
it.
I want to stamp that right now so everybody understands that. And today, what we're going to do, we're going to discuss a subject that a lot of you didn't even know too much about it a few years back. And and Dr. Scott is well educated and well qualified to talk about this. So let's get into Black Friday. What is that? I hear so much about it. Some
Yeah,
people don't know about it. Can you just talk to us about it, please?
sure, sure. The I would say probably the one of the most tragic race issues ever experienced on the side of African Americans in this country was on June 1st of 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. There was a section of the downtown area that was all black. And these were black entrepreneurs, these were black business owners, these were black investors who were doing everything across the board, not just barbershops, but banks and real estate. There was a kind of a Wall Street kind of inherence going on there. And the problem was during the 1920s, and of course, prior to that time, there was this feeling that African Americans must stay in their place, mainly because of Jim Crow, which really started back in 1619 when the first Africans came here, not as slaves, but as indentured servants. They were put at arm's length just because of their genetic makeup. And that being put at arm's length meant they are not equal. Matter of fact, not only are they not equal, they are inferior to Caucasian Americans. And so as a result, this kind of tone started in 1619. And then as history went on, we know slavery came in about 1640. And then that was almost a verification that people of African descent are not equal to European Americans because they wouldn't be enslaved if that was the case. So when the Civil War started in 1861, there were 4 million African Americans in slavery, but there were 500,000 who were free. And a lot of them had this ingenuity, had this idea of creativity of this 500,000, but they had to keep their place because they were Jim Crows and they were considered less than. Now, after the Civil War in 1865, Reconstruction came along for 12 years until 1877. And there was an attempt by the federal government to give equal rights to African American people, 4 million that had just come out of slavery. It failed utterly. And from 1877 all the way to 1896, Jim Crow and the separation of skin color because of inferiority was the major way of life for African Americans. And then in 1896, you have the Plessy decision. And the Supreme Court decided that segregation is legal across the whole country. Separate but equal, it was called, but not that equal. But in spite of that, by 1921, African Americans in Oklahoma had begun to have an uprising, much like the Harlem Renaissance that would come later, just a few years later. And there in Tulsa, Oklahoma, there was the strongest representation of educated, entrepreneurial, very much obligated to the success of what education can do for African Americans, even under the oppression of segregation. And as a result, you could say a Wall Street like kind of economic power burst forth in Tulsa. Now, that was allowed as long as you stayed in that district of Tulsa. And as we know, It became what we would call today a multi-million dollar kind of issue going on there. But one thing happened. One day, a young man, 17 years old, got into an elevator, and the Caucasian young lady was the elevator operator, apparently said that she was accosted by him. When she was asked to be brought to trial and to verify that, she would not do it. But that was just enough that maybe this happened. And so he was eventually arrested, this young man, African American male. And a number of vigilantes felt that as Caucasian Americans, they have to stand for the white womanhood and do something. So they went to the jailhouse and they asked for the authorities to release this young man. They would not do that. Then a number of African American soldiers, former soldiers, came and they stood by to ensure his safeguard. Then mysteriously, something happened called, they don't know what or what side, but a gunshot took off. And as a result, the rumor began that this group of African Americans were trying to protect someone who violated, to any degree, some degree, at least accosted a Caucasian lady, and now they were shooting at them. And that was not going to be tolerated. And so what happened was a true scorched earth policy. Every African American in Tulsa at this time in 1921, June 1st, was either slaughtered, chased out of town, their homes were burnt, the businesses were burnt, and you could say, even for the first time, Americans, fellow Americans, used, I would say, ammunition from airplanes, even bombs, and actually bombed certain parts of Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921 on June 1st. And before you know it, they say 300 people were killed. I would say probably 2 times that amount were killed, but the scorched earth policy wiped out the entire economic district that existed there in Tulsa. And that gave us an impression, and I would say this, that even though segregation could try to hold down African Americans could rise up. They have a resiliency, I think, picked up by 225 years of slavery. And I think this resiliency is something that America should see as part of the American fabric. We are a multicultural group. We are a pluralistic society. And the African American experience is the American experience. And here they were rising up, even though racial oppression through segregation was there. But the last time that an African American male would ever cross the line in their eyes, they felt they were going to destroy the entire setting there in Tulsa. And that's what happened. And it's a shameful thing in our history, so tragic. There's never been any reparations. There's never been any talk about how much was lost and what was never recovered back. And it was all because of a rumor, not only of what this young African American man did, but also who fired the first shot. So I would say it was a small form of a genocidal kind of approach. If you were of African descent, you were the target, regardless of your past, regardless of your official stance, and no matter what you were doing, you were considered, just because of your genetic makeup, worthy of death or at least being chased out of town. So this was a tragic thing, and there's never been a recovery in that area, especially as high of an apex that was reached during this time.
Wow. Doctor, we really appreciate that information because some of the things you were saying, I didn't know about. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that the audience are going to be writing in for you to explain some other things that had happened around that time. Maybe talk about some more of the good things that were going on before they were smashed down like they were.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, the purpose of this interview is, do you believe that education is important based on what we've just seen? Do you think that we can take what we have the right to do now, which to educate ourselves? Do you think that's important? And if so, tell me why.
Yeah, I really do. I believe education is critical. What education does is it gives you a foundation. It gives you a launching pad to actually change the course of our society. Education is the bottom line qualifier. Even though your ideas, your passion, your devotion and your noble thought may be so high, and even as what is needed in this country, without education, you don't have a footing. Education has always been the bottom line, I would say, strengthening factor of any cause that would eventually, and I would say long term wise, really change our country. And we see this especially with the 1909 coming forth of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. The man who started this with 50 other Caucasian Americans and an African American woman named Ida B. Wells, W.E.B. Du Bois started this in 1909. And his whole thought was to have a talented tenth, a group of African Americans, well educated, well groomed, well articulated, and I would say even with a mind to go beyond and change society with what was existing there as the challenge of so much of the odds against them. And this talented tenth was not to replace the other 90% of African Americans, but it was to be the vanguard. It was to take hold of the pioneering kind of action to open a door for the masses. And as a result, W.B. Du Bois felt the bottom line was education, and what we would call today not just a BA, but at least a master's. And of course, W.B. Du Bois was the first African American to get a PhD from Harvard in the late 1800s. That man did so much for education. If you look up W.E.B. Du Bois, you will find out that Malcolm X and Dr. King both felt he passed the baton on to them. And his major thrust was the matter of education. And the whole 1950s, 1960s change of our social landscape by those two great leaders was primarily because of the educational boom. Here we see Dr. King, who was formally educated and earned his PhD. And then we see Malcolm X, who was self-educated. He was so much into reading when he was in prison, he eventually had to wear glasses because he was his eyes were getting weakened by
Yes.
squinting so much. But eventually he could go to London, he could go to Oxford and hold this spontaneous kind of lecture in which he spoke without any notes in front of him. And he had the top students on the planet sitting on the edge of their seat because of what he took in his path of self-education. So it's possible, whether formal or not. Now formal gives you some credentials, but I would say we need both. We need that informal education that becomes the spark in us to use the formal education. And once you have that as your footing, anything, I believe the sky is the limit. We are in an information kind of world now. And the key is how much can you pick up and how much can you sift out of the truth, and how many connections and inferences and implications can you make to open up a pathway for change. And I think we all know we need change in the society, but it starts with education. It's the diving board to make the plunge worth it all.
Yes, I put a double stamp on it. I do believe that my daughter, for a fact, just got her master's. My son is a certified CPA, and another gentleman who is my other son, he is a producer.
Okay.
So we need all that, and they all came from the education background. I definitely understand what you're saying. My wife has 6 degrees.
Good for her.
So
My goodness.
yes, education is very, very important. Experience is just as important, but what you're going to do with that experience is more important.
That's right.
Let's talk about something that just occurred without putting a stamp on the time here, but something was just passed yesterday. And I'm pretty excited to talk about this. It has a lot to do with recognizing the freedom of slavery.
Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit about that. Juneteenth, what we're talking about. Dr. Take it away.
Sure, you bet. Well, back in September of 1862, President Lincoln gave a speech, actually an executive order that was to be effective January 1, 1863. But he gave it in September of 1862. And in this famous speech, I think if I just say 2 words, everyone would understand it, was called the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, this proclamation was not going to free anyone immediately because it actually gave a order to those states that were fighting against the Union, and those states would not even relinquish anything. But it was the start of a snowball effect, and it was an executive order that all the slaves, by then it was 4 million slaves in this country, would be set free. The war had started back in 1861 in April, all because of the financial gain that slaves had provided for the South. You could say three quarters or 75% of the world's cotton came out of these 11 Confederate states. This was the first big business for America. This was multi-billion compared to today's rates. And so to say slavery is immoral, so let's stop it, the dollar bill was the drive to say, we're not going to stop it. Matter of fact, we'll go to war. And that's what the Confederates did. Now, as a result of that, Lincoln felt if he could give this speech, he could open up the door for black troops to serve. He could open up an inspiration for slaves to run away. And he kind of, in a sense, was very successful in doing that eventually. Now, as of January 1, 1863, slaves were to be set free. Not until the end of the war, which is April 1865, was slavery ended. Now, the thing is this, there were 250,000 slaves, African American people in Galveston, Texas, on the east side of Texas, that had not heard anything about the war is over. They hadn't even heard anything about a speech that said slavery is over. So it wasn't until June 19th, 1865, in Galveston, Texas, Major Granger read the Emancipation Proclamation, which was actually over 2.5 years old and being released. This was the first time we could say the final remnant of those 4 million African American slaves heard the words that slavery is over. It can stop immediately as you receive this in your ears. And that was a great, great thing that African Americans actually could say, this is our Independence Day. Of course, we use July 4th, 1776, but America has two Independence Days. There's also one in June 19th, 1865. And that was such a release and emancipation because now slavery had reached the outer rim. To this word, listen to this, had reached the outer rim as to being over. Slavery is done. And because of that, African Americans ever since, especially in Texas, for the past number of decades, have celebrated June 19th as the Independence Day, as the day of the true and final closure of slavery. So what happened through the years is 45 states eventually would observe June 19th. And of course, you can put those words together into this one word, Juneteenth, which means this is the day, just like July 4th meant so much to our country, federally speaking, but it was June 19th, 1865 that meant so much to the real idea of freedom, equality as a potential, because now slavery has been terminated and the slaves have heard it and understand it. And that became a point of celebration ever since 1865. And I would say Juneteenth is an inspiration to our countries going forward because just this week, the House passed this idea that Juneteenth should not just be a state observance that Texas does. It should be a federal law across all 50 states, a federal holiday. The House okayed it on Monday. The Senate okayed it on Tuesday, Wednesday, and yesterday, June 17th, 2021, the President, Biden, signed this federal holiday into execution just yesterday. Today is June 18th. Just on June 17th, it became recognized as a federal holiday. And that means the African American history is something of I would say, a grafted even tapestry of American history. And this is something for all of us to rejoice. Of course, slavery had its opposition not only from African American people, but a good number of Caucasians, or what we call today European Americans, our brothers and sisters, white brothers and sisters. They had a lot of abolitionists and a lot of folks that were against slavery. but the money factor and the use of racism became, I would say, an explosion for economic wealth, really America's first big business. But on this day, June 19, 1865, the final group of slaves, at least 250,000, were set free by their own hearing of the truth. And this is a great thing to celebrate, to know that only since yesterday, the government has finally come through and made it a federal holiday. This is a major step, a major advancement.
Beautiful, beautiful. I would love to hear more, and we are going to hear more. Um, Dr. Scott, we're going to make sure that you have a voice that needs to be heard on Funnel Connection. Um, just so everybody understand, we are not prejudiced whatsoever. We love everyone
Mm-hmm.
because God made every spirit.
That's right.
And so what we hear is just talking the truth.
Yeah.
Uh, Dr. Scott is a educator, and we'll be talking more about other things that has a lot to do with all nationalities.
Mm-hmm.
But because Juneteenth just it just happened, legalizing the holiday just happened. We wanted to make sure we saved this broadcast for that purpose, and we definitely thank you for educating us even further of this subject line. But we
Thank
will have you back very soon. And for those of you who are listening, make sure you watch his blog. So he will be posting things of interest to everyone. So make sure you watch his blog. He once again is officially Funnels Connection educator blogger. Congratulations on that.
Thank you, good sir. Appreciate it.
Yes. So we'll see you in the next few days. And we can talk about the importance of education and other things. What other things that Black people contribute into the United States? Some of the inventors.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about that and different educational subjects that somebody may be interested in taking
Mm-hmm.
and things they need to know what's out there. We can talk about that as well. Some of their choices.
Good.
Okay.
I'm
Well,
looking
once
forward.
again, thank you again for your time. And we
Mm-hmm.
are going to Dr. Scott. We'll see you very soon.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.